What if one decision shook the monarchy? Lady Sarah Spencer, once linked to Prince Charles, stood by Diana through her toughest battles. But years after Diana's tragic death, Sarah made a choice that left Queen Camilla in tears. What was this decision? How did it reflect her loyalty to Diana? And why does Diana's legacy still overshadow the royal family? Let's find out in detail. The Spencer family had long been part of Britain's aristocracy, but few could have predicted just how deeply their legacy would intertwine with the royal family. Growing up in the Grand Althorp estate, Sarah and Diana Spencer experienced a life of privilege, yet their paths would unfold in very different ways. While Diana would go on to become the most photographed woman in the world, Sarah was the elder sister, the one who led the way, the one who shaped Diana's early years, and the one who would eventually make a decision that shook the very foundation of the monarchy. Sarah, born in the mid-1950s, was raised with a strong sense of duty, molded by the traditions of Britain's upper class. Unlike Diana, who exuded shyness in her early years, Sarah had always been more independent and outspoken. Her bold nature set her apart, a trait that would later prove both a strength and a source of tension when she found herself unexpectedly in the royal spotlight. It was during her early 20s that her life took a turn that no one could have foreseen. She began dating Prince Charles, the heir to the British throne. It was 1977 when Sarah and Charles first met at a pheasant hunt on a friend's estate. Charles, under increasing pressure to find a suitable bride, was drawn to Sarah's confidence. She was lively, intelligent, and unafraid to challenge him in conversation, something that set her apart from many of the aristocratic women he had courted before. The two shared weekends at Balmoral, where they rode horses across the vast Scottish Highlands, fished in icy streams, and spent quiet moments discussing art, literature, and their shared love for the outdoors. The relationship seemed promising, but Sarah's independent streak soon proved to be a challenge. At a time when the royal family valued discretion above all else, Sarah had little interest in keeping quiet. She gave an interview to the press where she spoke openly about her relationship with Charles, making it clear that she was not in love with him, and even joking that she had no intention of marrying him, whether he was a dustman or the future king. The comment did not go unnoticed. The royal family was outraged, and Charles, ever conscious of public perception, quickly distanced himself. The romance came to an abrupt end, but Sarah's connection to the future king was far from over. Though her own relationship with Charles had ended, Sarah would unknowingly play a pivotal role in introducing her younger sister to him. Diana had already encountered Charles a few times in passing, but it was at a social gathering where Sarah encouraged them to speak. Diana, just 16 at the time, was still a schoolgirl, innocent, warm, and shy, yet possessing a natural charm that immediately caught Charles's attention. The two shared polite conversation, but nothing about that moment suggested the magnitude of what was to come. Over the next few years, as Diana transitioned from adolescence to young adulthood, her path crossed with Charles again. By then, she had grown into a poised young woman, one whose warmth and kindness made her stand out. She was different from the women Charles had previously dated, soft-spoken, demure, and seemingly untouched by the complexities of royal life. As pressure mounted for Charles to marry, Diana became the ideal choice in the eyes of both the public and the royal family. She was aristocratic, well-mannered, and above all, she seemed willing to take on the responsibilities of being the future queen. In early 1981, the engagement was announced to the world, and the fairy tale seemed complete. Diana, at just 19 years old, was stepping into a role that many could only dream of. Sarah, watching from the sidelines, witnessed the transformation of her younger sister from a private individual to a global icon. Though she had once been the one in Charles's life, she harbored no resentment toward Diana. In fact, she took great pride in knowing that her sister was about to become one of the most significant figures in modern royal history. The wedding of the century took place on 29 July 1981 at St. Paul's Cathedral. The world watched as Diana, adorned in an ivory silk gown with a 25-foot train, walked down the aisle to marry the future king. Nearly 800 million people tuned in to witness the moment, mesmerized by the spectacle of it all. Sarah was there, standing by her sister's side, a silent yet significant presence in the most publicized royal wedding in history. As Diana settled into life as the Princess of Wales, Sarah maintained her position within the Spencer family, but she remained deeply involved in her sister's life. She saw firsthand the challenges that came with being part of the royal family, the relentless press scrutiny, the immense pressure to be perfect, and the growing strain within Diana's marriage. Diana was adored by the public, but behind the scenes, the realities of royal life were far less glamorous. Charles and Diana's marriage, though celebrated by millions, was already beginning to show cracks. While Sarah had once been the outspoken sister, it was now Diana who was beginning to find her voice. She confided in Sarah, sharing her struggles and frustrations, knowing that her sister would understand in ways that few others could. Sarah, having experienced the brief intensity of royal life, became a quiet source of support for Diana as she navigated the pressures of being the Princess of Wales. As the years passed, it became evident that Diana's fairy tale was unraveling. Charles's close relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles remained a lingering shadow over the marriage. Though Diana tried to make things work, it was clear that the foundation of their relationship was crumbling. The world, once captivated by the image of a perfect royal couple, began to see the fractures beneath the surface. Through it all, Sarah remained steadfast. She had once been in the very position her sister now found herself in, linked to Charles, scrutinized by the press, and expected to conform to royal traditions. But unlike Diana, Sarah had walked away early before the expectations became too much to bear. Watching her sister struggle, she knew that Diana's journey would be far more difficult than her own. The weight of being the future queen was something that no one, not even a sister, could fully prepare her for. By the early 1990s, the tension between Diana and Charles had reached a breaking point. The public began to see glimpses of the truth: Diana's loneliness, Charles's ongoing connection to Camilla, and the growing emotional distance between them. Sarah, though never one to interfere publicly, remained in the background, a constant presence in Diana's life. As the world continued to follow the unraveling of the royal marriage, one thing remained clear: Diana's story was no longer just her own. It was part of a much larger legacy, one that would forever be linked to the Spencer name. And as Sarah watched her sister navigate the turbulence of royal life, she could not have known that in the years to come, she would be faced with a decision that would leave an enduring mark on the monarchy. As Diana's public image soared, the reality of her life behind palace walls was far less glamorous. While she was adored by millions, she struggled with the isolation and expectations that came with being the Princess of Wales. Her early years in the royal family were marked by efforts to fit into a rigid system, one that demanded perfection, while offering little emotional support. Sarah Spencer, though not in the public eye as much as her sister, remained a steady presence in her life. Having once been romantically linked to Charles, Sarah understood the pressures that came with royal associations, though even she could not have predicted just how difficult things would become for Diana. By the mid-1980s, cracks in Diana and Charles's marriage were becoming more apparent. The fairy tale that had captivated the world was beginning to unravel, and the public, though still enchanted by Diana, started to see the struggles beneath the surface. At the heart of it was the growing emotional distance between the couple. Diana, once hopeful about her marriage, found herself increasingly alone, while Charles sought comfort in the one person who had never truly left his side: Camilla Parker Bowles. The relationship between Charles and Camilla had existed long before Diana entered the picture. They had been romantically involved in the early 1970s, but their relationship was considered unsuitable for a future king. Camilla had married Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973, yet she and Charles remained close. Despite efforts to present a united front, Diana became painfully aware that Camilla's presence was a constant in her husband's life. As Diana's unhappiness grew, she confided in those she trusted, including Sarah, who had witnessed Charles's mannerisms firsthand during their brief romance years earlier. Sarah, however, had long distanced herself from royal affairs, focusing on her own life outside the spotlight. In 1980, she had married Neil McCorquodale, a former British Army officer, and had since lived a quieter existence away from public scrutiny. But while Sarah had been able to retreat into a more private life, Diana's every move was under a microscope. The press followed her relentlessly, and as speculation about the state of her marriage increased, so did the pressure on her. Despite her private struggles, Diana remained committed to her role as a mother. The birth of Prince William in 1982 and Prince Harry in 1984 gave her life meaning in ways that royal duties never could. She was determined to give her children a sense of normalcy, even if it meant breaking royal protocol. Diana took them to amusement parks, fast food restaurants, and allowed them to experience life outside the royal bubble. She wanted them to see the world beyond the palace walls, a vision that would later shape both William and Harry's approach to public service. The increasing strain on Diana and Charles's marriage became undeniable by the late 1980s. In 1989, a private phone conversation between Charles and Camilla was leaked to the press, later dubbed the Camilla-Gate scandal. The transcript, published in 1993, revealed intimate exchanges between them, leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. For Diana, the betrayal was not just personal, but public, confirming what she had suspected for years. It was a moment that reshaped how the world viewed the royal couple, tarnishing Charles's image while further elevating Diana's status as the wronged princess. Sarah remained a quiet supporter of Diana, but she was never one to seek the limelight. Unlike their younger sister Jane, who had married Robert Fellows, a senior royal courtier, Sarah had chosen a life away from royal circles. However, she continued to be there for Diana in private, offering guidance whenever possible. But even Sarah could see that Diana was beginning to forge her own path, one that would eventually lead to one of the most defining moments of her life. In 1995, Diana took control of her narrative in an unprecedented way. She sat down for an explosive interview with journalist Martin Bashir on BBC's Panorama, where she spoke candidly about her struggles within the royal family. She famously stated, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded," a direct acknowledgement of Charles and Camilla's ongoing relationship. The interview sent shockwaves through the monarchy. It was a bold move, one that broke the unspoken rule of royal discretion. The impact was immediate. Diana's popularity soared even further, while the royal family was left in damage control. Behind the scenes, the interview had consequences. The Queen, recognizing that the situation had become untenable, advised Charles and Diana to proceed with a formal divorce. By the summer of 1996, it was finalized. Diana lost her official status as Her Royal Highness, but retained the title Princess of Wales. She was now free from the confines of royal duty, though she remained a prominent public figure. With her newfound independence, she dedicated herself to humanitarian work, using her global platform to advocate for causes close to her heart, from AIDS awareness to the campaign against landmines. Despite her divorce, Diana's connection to the royal family was never fully severed. She was, after all, the mother of the future king. Her presence at public events remained a subject of fascination, and her every move continued to make headlines. Meanwhile, Charles and Camilla's relationship, though still controversial, was becoming increasingly open. Camilla was slowly introduced to public life, though acceptance was far from immediate. Sarah, watching from a distance, remained protective of Diana. While she had once been linked to Charles, her loyalty had always been with her sister. The bond between the Spencer sisters had been strong since childhood, and even as Diana's life became more complicated, Sarah never wavered in her support. She had chosen a different path, one that allowed her to live away from public scrutiny, but she understood the weight of the world Diana carried on her shoulders. As Diana continued to navigate life after her divorce, she remained a devoted mother. William and Harry were her priority, and she worked tirelessly to ensure that their childhood was filled with love and stability, despite the complexities of royal life. She had seen firsthand how the institution could be unyielding, and she was determined to shield her sons from the same struggles she had faced. By the summer of 1997, Diana's life had taken yet another turn. She had begun a new relationship with Dodi Fayed, the son of billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. Their romance was the subject of intense media scrutiny, with paparazzi following their every move. Diana, who had long battled with the press, was once again at the center of relentless speculation. She had expressed concerns about being constantly pursued, but there was little she could do to escape the cameras. The events that followed would change history forever. On the evening of 30th August 1997, Diana and Dodi arrived in Paris seeking privacy away from the prying eyes of the media. They dined at the Ritz Hotel, owned by the Fayed family, before attempting to leave through the back entrance in an effort to avoid photographers. Just after midnight, their car sped through the streets of Paris, trailed by paparazzi on motorcycles. Moments later, inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, the car lost control and crashed into a pillar. News of the accident spread rapidly, though details were initially scarce. In the early hours of 31st August, as the world waited for updates, the severity of the crash became clear. Dodi Fayed and the driver, Henri Paul, were pronounced dead at the scene. Diana, still alive but critically injured, was rushed to the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital. Doctors worked tirelessly to save her, but at 4 a.m. she was pronounced dead. The world was in shock. Diana, the woman who had captured the hearts of millions, was gone. The grief was immediate and overwhelming, as tributes poured in from around the globe. But while the world mourned, her family was faced with the painful reality of bringing her home. Sarah and Jane, along with Prince Charles, traveled to Paris to accompany Diana's body back to England. It was a solemn journey, one that no sister should ever have to make. As Sarah stood at Diana's funeral, watching as her younger sister was laid to rest, she could not have known that in the years to come, she would be faced with a choice that would test her loyalty and shake the foundations of the monarchy. As Britain awoke to the news of Diana's death, an overwhelming wave of grief swept across the country. The woman who had redefined what it meant to be a princess, who had given the monarchy a more human touch, was gone. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace, leaving thousands of flowers, handwritten letters, and candles. The air was thick with sorrow, but beneath the grief, there was also anger. Many blamed the relentless press, whose pursuit of Diana had contributed to the tragic events in Paris. Others turned their frustration toward the royal family, who remained silent in the days following her death. The absence of an official statement from Buckingham Palace only intensified public resentment. While the world mourned, Sarah Spencer and the rest of the Spencer family were focused on one thing: bringing Diana home. Sarah, along with her sister Jane and Prince Charles, flew to Paris to retrieve Diana's body. It was a heart-wrenching moment, one that forced them to set aside any lingering tensions for the sake of honoring Diana's memory. As they arrived at the hospital where Diana had spent her final moments, the reality of the loss became undeniable. Just days earlier, she had been full of life, making plans for the future. Now, she is gone. When they returned to England, Diana's coffin was draped in the royal standard, a symbol of her enduring status as the mother of a future king. The funeral preparations began immediately, and it was clear that this would not be a quiet, private affair. The people of Britain had claimed Diana as their own, and they wanted the chance to say goodbye. On the morning of 6 September 1997, the streets of London were lined with mourners, their faces etched with grief as they watched the funeral procession make its way toward Westminster Abbey. Sarah walked behind Diana's coffin along with Jane, Charles, and the two young princes, William and Harry. It was a devastating sight. Two boys, just 15 and 12 years old, forced to walk in front of the world as they buried their mother. The moment was etched into history, a reminder of the personal cost of royalty. Sarah remained composed, but the weight of the day was undeniable. She had lost a sister, and no amount of public sympathy could ease that pain. Inside Westminster Abbey, the ceremony was attended by world leaders, celebrities, and members of the royal family. But it was Earl Spencer, Diana's brother, who delivered the most memorable speech. In his eulogy, he spoke passionately about his sister, condemning the way she had been treated by the press and vowing to protect her sons from suffering the same fate. His words were met with applause, an unusual moment for a royal funeral, but one that reflected the mood of the nation. After the ceremony, Diana's body was taken to her final resting place at Althorpe, the Spencer family estate. Instead of being buried in the royal crypt, as tradition might have dictated, she was laid to rest on an island in the middle of a serene lake. The decision was made to protect her grave from intrusions, ensuring that she would have the privacy in death that she had so often been denied in life. Sarah and the rest of the Spencer family stood by as Diana was lowered into the ground, a final farewell to the sister they had known long before she was the people's princess. In the years that followed, Sarah remained largely out of the public eye, dedicating herself to preserving Diana's legacy. She became one of the executors of Diana's estate, overseeing the distribution of her assets and ensuring that her charitable work continued. While the world moved on, Sarah never let go of the responsibility of keeping her sister's memory alive. She took an active role in the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund, which raised millions for causes that Diana had championed. Meanwhile, the royal family faced increasing scrutiny. The Queen and Prince Charles worked to rebuild public trust, but Diana's shadow loomed large. Camilla Parker Bowles, long seen as the woman at the center of Charles and Diana's failed marriage, remained a divisive figure. For years, the idea of Charles marrying Camilla seemed impossible. The public was not ready to accept her, and the royal family knew it. But slowly, attitudes began to shift. Camilla was gradually introduced into public life, appearing alongside Charles at official engagements. The efforts to rehabilitate her image were subtle but deliberate. By the early 2000s, speculation about Charles and Camilla's future intensified. Many within royal circles believed that if Camilla were to ever become Charles's wife, she would need the support of those closest to Diana, her family. The Spencers, however, had never been particularly close to the royal family, and Sarah, in particular, had maintained her distance. She had always been loyal to Diana, and the idea of embracing Camilla as the future queen was difficult to accept. When Charles and Camilla finally announced their engagement in 2005, it was met with mixed reactions. Many had softened toward Camilla, recognizing the depth of her relationship with Charles. But for those who had loved Diana, the news was bittersweet. Sarah and the rest of the Spencer family were invited to the wedding, a gesture that was meant to symbolize unity. However, Sarah made a decision that surprised many. She declined to attend. It was not a public statement of defiance, nor was it meant to stir controversy. It was simply a personal choice, one that reflected her unwavering loyalty to Diana. The decision did not go unnoticed. Camilla, who had worked tirelessly to earn public acceptance, was reportedly deeply affected by it. She had always understood that she would never replace Diana, but the absence of Diana's family at her wedding was a painful reminder of the past. For Sarah, it was not about holding a grudge or making a spectacle. It was about honoring her sister's memory in the only way she knew how. Camilla's wedding to Charles in April 2005 marked a turning point in royal history. The ceremony at Windsor Guildhall was a far cry from the grandeur of Charles and Diana's wedding over 2 decades earlier. It was a quiet, understated affair, reflecting the years of controversy surrounding their relationship. For Camilla, it was the culmination of a long and difficult journey, one in which she had endured immense public scrutiny. But even as she took on the title of Duchess of Cornwall, there were still reminders that Diana's presence lingered in every corner of the royal family. Sarah Spencer's absence from the wedding was one of those reminders. Although it was not publicly addressed, those close to the family knew it was a decision that carried weight. While Charles had worked hard to integrate Camilla into royal life, there were still those who struggled to accept her, especially those closest to Diana. Sarah had always been protective of her younger sister, and though Diana had been gone for nearly 8 years by that point, her loyalty had not wavered. To Sarah, attending the wedding would have been a silent endorsement of a union that had caused Diana so much pain. It was a personal decision, not one meant to make a statement, but it did not go unnoticed by the royal family. For Camilla, the realization that some wounds would never fully heal was painful. She had spent years carefully stepping into her new role, earning the trust of the public and the royal household. But the Spencers' absence was a reminder that no matter how much time had passed, there were those who still viewed her as the woman who had played a part in Diana's heartbreak. It was a reality she had long accepted. But on a day that should have been one of the happiest of her life, it was an emotional weight that was difficult to ignore. In the years that followed, Camilla's role within the royal family became more defined. She took on royal duties, supported charities, and slowly gained a level of acceptance that had once seemed impossible. Yet, for all the progress she had made, the presence of Diana's legacy remained an ever-present force. When Prince William and Prince Harry reached adulthood, their own perspectives on their father's second marriage became subjects of public interest. While both men had grown to have a cordial relationship with Camilla, the emotional complexities of their mother's history were unavoidable. Sarah, for her part, continued to live a private life, staying out of the public eye as much as possible. She remained close to her nephews, offering them the same quiet support she had given their mother. Unlike the royal family, which operated under strict traditions and expectations, the Spencers had always maintained a sense of independence. Diana had inherited that trait, and it was something Sarah had always admired in her sister. As William and Harry grew into their roles, Sarah remained a steady, if unseen, presence, ensuring that Diana's memory was always honored. As the years passed, the monarchy itself evolved. Queen Elizabeth's advancing age brought discussions about the future of the royal family, and with Charles positioned as the next king, questions arose about Camilla's eventual title. When Charles and Camilla had married, it had been announced that she would take on the title of princess consort when the time came. This was a decision made to respect Diana's memory, as calling Camilla queen had been considered too controversial at the time. But as public sentiment toward Camilla gradually softened, so did the discussions surrounding her future role. In February 2022, on the 70th anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's accession to the throne, the Queen made a surprising announcement. In an official statement, she expressed her desire for Camilla to be known as Queen Consort when Charles eventually took the throne. The announcement marked the final stage in Camilla's long journey toward royal acceptance. It was a moment of validation for her, a sign that she had been fully embraced within the monarchy. But for those who had stood by Diana, it was another difficult reminder of how much had changed. For Sarah and the rest of the Spencer family, the announcement was significant. The idea of Camilla being referred to as Queen Consort would have been unthinkable 2 decades earlier. But time had changed perspectives, and the royal family had moved forward in ways that not everyone could have predicted. Still, for Sarah, the loyalty she had to her sister had never wavered. Diana's legacy was not just something of the past. It was still alive in her sons, in the charities that bore her name, and in the millions of people who still saw her as the people's princess. Sarah had never sought out the spotlight, and even as the royal family transitioned into a new era, she remained committed to the values she had always held. She had no public reaction to Camilla's title announcement, but her actions over the years had spoken louder than any statement could. Her decision not to attend Charles and Camilla's wedding had been made long ago, and though the monarchy had moved forward, Sarah had remained steadfast in her devotion to Diana's memory. As Charles ascended the throne in September 2022 following the passing of Queen Elizabeth, the world watched as history unfolded once again. Camilla officially took on the title of Queen Consort, standing beside her husband as they stepped into their new roles. It was a moment of both continuity and change, a reflection of how the monarchy had adapted over the years. But even as Camilla settled into her position as queen, the echoes of Diana's impact remained. Sarah's role in all of this had always been in the background, away from public attention. She had never sought recognition for her loyalty to Diana, nor had she tried to rewrite history. But in the choices she had made, in the quiet ways she had honored her sister's memory, she had left her own mark on the legacy of the Spencer family. The monarchy may have moved forward, but for Sarah, Diana was never just a chapter in history. She was a sister, a mother, and a woman whose impact would never be erased. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.